He was the man who made millions of people scream his name. The king of rock and roll had everything the world could offer: fame, money, and endless admiration. But behind the lights, behind the music, and behind the perfect image was a story filled with controversy, loneliness, addiction, and secrets that few people truly understood. The world saw a superstar who possessed an otherworldly power over his audience, a man who transformed the landscape of modern culture with a single flash of his smile and a tilt of his hips. Yet, as the curtain pulled back, the reality of his existence revealed a deeply isolated soul, trapped inside a gilded cage of his own making. How does a man who gave everything to his fans end up with so little for himself? What was the true price of becoming the most famous face on the planet? To understand the tragic downfall of Elvis Presley, we must look beyond the dazzling jumpsuits and the screaming arenas and step into the shadows of a life that was as dark as it was brilliant. Long before he was a god of modern entertainment, Elvis Aaron Presley was just a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, born into a world of severe poverty and profound loss. The defining trauma of his early life occurred before he even took his first breath. His identical twin brother, Jesse Garon Presley, was stillborn. This phantom presence would haunt Elvis for the rest of his days, leaving him with a perpetual, unquenchable thirst for connection and a deep-seated fear of abandonment. Raised by his fiercely protective mother, Gladys, and his quiet father, Vernon, Elvis grew up in a deeply religious, musically rich environment. When the family moved to Memphis, Tennessee, the young introverted boy found solace in the vibrant sounds of gospel music, country, and the soulful rhythm and blues echoing from Beale Street. He was an outsider, a unique spirit who wore flashy clothes and styled his hair in defiance of the conservative norms of the early 1950s. He absorbed the raw emotion of the Pentecostal church services he attended with his parents, learning how music could move not just the mind, but the entire physical body. He would spend hours wandering through the African-American neighborhoods of Memphis, listening to the street musicians and buying his clothes from Lansky Brothers on Beale Street, developing a personal style that was completely alien to the quiet, conformist suburbs of post-war America. This deep cultural synthesis was brewing inside him, waiting for the exact right moment to explode onto a world that had no idea what was coming. Then came 1954 and a fateful recording session at Sun Records. When Elvis began to sing a blues track called That's All Right, something electric happened. It was a sound America had never heard before, a seamless, energetic fusion of black and white musical traditions that shattered racial and cultural barriers overnight. The world was changing, and Elvis Presley was the catalyst. Within months, he was a regional sensation, but his true ascension required a different kind of architect. Enter Colonel Tom Parker, a former carnival promoter who recognized that Elvis was not just a talented singer, but a once-in-a-generation commodity. Parker secured a contract with RCA Victor, and by 1956, Elvis was a national phenomenon. Heartbreak Hotel topped the charts, followed by a dizzying string of hits that redefined popular music forever. The speed of his rise was unprecedented, terrifying the old guard of the entertainment industry, who had never seen an artist capture the hearts and wallets of the youth market with such absolute monopolistic authority. Record stores could not keep his singles in stock. Radio stations were flooded with endless requests, and every television network scrambled to book the young man from Memphis, realizing that his mere presence on screen guaranteed record-breaking viewership numbers. He was an overnight millionaire, a living god to teenagers, and a sudden massive industry unto himself. But with this unprecedented success came a wave of intense cultural shock. When Elvis took the stage in the mid-1950s, his revolutionary performance style struck conservative America like a lightning bolt. It was not just the music. It was the way he moved. His uninhibited, suggestive hip movements and raw, primal energy sent shockwaves through a society still deeply rooted in post-war traditionalism. To the youth of America, he was freedom incarnate. To the establishment, he was a dangerous threat to the moral fabric of the country. Television variety shows struggled with how to present him, famously filming him only from the waist up during his appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show to avoid offending public decency. Religious leaders denounced him from the pulpit, calling his music a tool of devilish corruption, while local city councils went so far as to ban his concerts or threaten him with arrest if he did not stand still on stage. Critics dismissed his music as a passing, degenerative fad, writing lengthy essays about the decline of Western civilization at the hands of rock and roll. Yet the censorship only fueled the fire. Every condemnation made him more alluring to a generation desperate to break away from the rigid expectations of their parents. Elvis had tapped into a generational rebellion, changing the nature of entertainment and celebrity forever. He was no longer just a musician, he was a cultural deity, an unstoppable force that split American history into two distinct eras, before Elvis and after him. Yet, just as he reached the absolute pinnacle of his early fame, destiny intervened in the form of a draft notice. In 1958, Elvis Presley put his skyrocketing career on hold to serve his country in the United States Army. It was a brilliant public relations move, orchestrated in part by Colonel Parker to soften Elvis's rebellious image and appeal to older generations. The wild, untamed rock and roller was transformed into a clean-cut, disciplined soldier, proving to his critics that he was a patriotic son of America. But the period was also marked by deep personal tragedy. Just months after he entered the service, his beloved mother Gladys passed away at the age of 46. Her death shattered Elvis, stripping away the one true anchor he had in a world that had become increasingly overwhelming. He wept uncontrollably at her funeral, screaming that he had lost everything he ever lived for. It was a wound that never truly healed, leaving an empty, aching void in his soul that he would spend the rest of his life trying to fill with fame, material possessions, and relationships. When he was shipped out to Germany to complete his service, he was a changed man, deeply grieving, intensely lonely, and profoundly vulnerable to anyone who could offer him a sense of comfort and stability. It was during this deployment in Bad Nauheim, Germany, that the trajectory of his private life would alter forever. It was here, at a social gathering in 1959, that the 24-year-old superstar was introduced to a young girl named Priscilla Beaulieu. She was the daughter of a United States Air Force officer, and she was just 14 years old. The relationship that developed between Elvis and Priscilla remains one of the most intensely analysed and heavily debated romances in celebrity history. To the public, it would eventually be marketed as a beautiful, real-life fairy tale, the world's biggest star falling in love with an innocent girl next door. But the truth was far more complicated, defined by a profound power imbalance and an unusual emotional dynamic that defied conventional societal norms. Elvis was immediately captivated by Priscilla's youth, innocence, and vulnerability. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, where managers, fans, and studio executives viewed him as a product to be exploited, she represented a rare, untouched sanctuary. He saw her as a blank canvas, someone he could completely mold, protect, and control without the fear of rejection or betrayal. For Priscilla, entering the orbit of the world's biggest celebrity was an overwhelming, surreal experience that disrupted her entire childhood. She was thrust into a mature, high-stakes environment before she had even completed her basic cognitive and social development, suddenly finding herself the object of affection for a man who was worshipped by millions of women across the globe. As the years passed, Elvis convinced Priscilla's parents to allow her to move to his Memphis estate, Graceland, under the condition that she finish her education there, live under the supervision of his father and stepmother, and eventually marry him when the time was right. Behind the gates of Graceland, a strange and isolated existence began to unfold for the young teenager. Elvis sought to mold Priscilla into his ideal vision of a woman, a living doll designed to cater to his specific taste, sense, and fantasies. He controlled her clothing, her hairstyle, her makeup, and even her posture, encouraging her to dye her hair jet black and style it in a massive, towering bouffant to match his own larger-than-life aesthetic. He insisted that she wear heavy eyeliner and specific outfits that he selected, effectively erasing her natural appearance in favor of a manufactured look. He created a world where she was expected to be available to him whenever he called, staying up all night to accommodate his erratic schedule, yet completely hidden from the prying eyes of the public and the media. It was a relationship built on intense, genuine devotion, but also on strict isolation, emotional dependency, and an absolute lack of personal autonomy for a girl who was still trying to figure out who she was. On May 1, 1967, after years of living in the shadows of his fame and facing immense pressure from Priscilla's family and Colonel Parker, the couple finally married in a brief, carefully staged 8-minute ceremony at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. The images beamed around the world showed a radiant, glamorous couple at the height of sophistication, the ultimate validation of the romantic myth they had built. Exactly 9 months later, on February 1, 1968, they welcomed their only child, Lisa Marie Presley. But the arrival of a child did not solidify the marriage. Instead, it exposed the deep fractures that had been widening beneath the surface for years, accelerating the emotional distance between them. The difficulties inside Elvis and Priscilla's marriage were profound and deeply rooted in Elvis's complex psychological makeup. He struggled significantly with the transition from seeing Priscilla as an idealized, untouchable muse to seeing her as a mother and a domestic wife. He possessed a deeply compartmentalized view of women, believing that a mother should be placed on a pristine pedestal, an ideology that severely impacted his ability to maintain physical intimacy within his marriage after Lisa Marie was born. His demanding career, Combined with his increasingly erratic lifestyle and constant absences, created an immense emotional distance that Priscilla could no longer ignore. Loneliness became her constant companion within the cold, echoing halls of Graceland. While Elvis travelled for film shoots and concert tours, surrounded by a loyal entourage of friends, employees, and hangers-on known as the Memphis Mafia, Priscilla remained largely confined to the estate, playing the role of the waiting wife in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. Furthermore, the glamorous image of the perfect marriage was continually eroded by the reality of systemic infidelity. Rumours and confirmed relationships outside the marriage plagued their union from the very beginning. Elvis frequently engaged in intense affairs with his Hollywood co-stars and women he met on the road, a pattern of behaviour that was quietly facilitated and covered up by his inner circle, who viewed it as a natural perk of his superstar status. Being married to a global icon meant that Priscilla had to share her husband not just with millions of adoring fans, but with a succession of other women, forcing her to endure public humiliation and private heartbreak. Eventually, the isolation, emotional neglect, and total loss of identity became too much to bear for the young woman. Seeking her own autonomy, her own identity, and genuine human connection, Priscilla engaged in her own extramural relationships, most notably with karate instructor Mike Stone, a man who provided the real present attention that Elvis never could. The fairy tale had dissolved into a painful, unsustainable reality, and in 1972, the couple separated, finalizing their divorce the following year. Though they walked away from each other legally, an enduring, complex affection persisted between them until the very end. They famously left the courthouse hand in hand after the divorce was finalized, leaving Elvis with a lingering sense of personal failure and a deeper plunge into isolation. As his personal life fractured, the pressures of maintaining the monumental myth of Elvis Presley began to take a devastating physical and mental toll. The world saw a powerful, charismatic performer on stage, a man who seemed to defy the aging process with his incredible vocal range and commanding stage presence, but few saw the struggling, exhausted, and broken man behind closed doors. To cope with the relentless demands of his touring schedule, the crushing weight of public expectation, and his chronic, lifelong insomnia, Elvis turned increasingly to prescription medication. What began as a reliance on amphetamines during his army days to stay awake on guard duty evolved into a massive daily regimen of downers to sleep, uppers to perform, heavy painkillers for his chronic ailments, and sedatives to calm his racing mind. He became trapped in a pharmaceutical roller coaster, using one chemical to counteract the effects of another, slowly eroding his body's natural defenses and distorting his perception of reality. The pressure to perform was relentless and unforgiving. After spending the 1960s trapped in a series of 30 formulaic, uninspiring Hollywood movies that drained his artistic soul and turned him into a punchline for serious music critics, Elvis had made a triumphant, legendary return to live performing with his 1968 comeback special. Dressed in black leather, raw and dangerous, he reminded the world exactly why he was the king. This massive creative rebirth led to a grueling, permanent residency in Las Vegas and a non-stop schedule of national tours that crisscrossed the country. The financial machinery surrounding him, which supported not only his own lavish lifestyle, but also the salaries of dozens of employees and the massive commissions of Colonel Parker, demanded that he keep working, no matter how exhausted, depressed, or physically ill he became. To meet these impossible demands, Elvis relied on a network of compliant medical professionals, most notably his personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, known to history as Dr. Nick. Over the years, thousands of doses of highly addictive narcotics, sedatives, and stimulants were prescribed to the superstar, creating a vicious cycle of chemical dependence that slowly and systematically destroyed his vital organs, bloated his physical appearance, and drastically altered his once gentle personality into someone prone to sudden bouts of rage and paranoia. Behind the gates of Graceland, Elvis's private life became increasingly eccentric and insular, defined by strange habits, dark obsessions, and an overwhelming need for absolute security and total control over his environment. He became a creature of the night, completely reversing his circadian rhythm, so that he slept through the daylight hours and awakened only after darkness fell upon Memphis. He had the windows of his upstairs bedroom permanently covered with heavy drapes and sealed with aluminum foil to eliminate any trace of natural light, creating a dark, frozen tomb where time stood completely still. His obsession with safety and personal protection grew to paranoid levels during his later years. He rarely travelled anywhere without a small arsenal of concealed firearms, and he was known to occasionally shoot out the television screens in his room if he disliked the program, the political commentator, or the entertainer appearing on the screen. He lived in constant fear of assassination, receiving frequent death threats, that required his security team to wear bulletproof vests and place armed guards around the stage during his performances. His lifestyle was one of extreme, unchecked excess and absolute isolation from the ordinary world. He surrounded himself exclusively with the Memphis Mafia, a group of childhood friends, cousins and bodyguards whose entire livelihoods depended on keeping Elvis happy, comfortable, and placated. In this carefully curated environment, no one dared to challenge his behavior, question his escalating drug use, or tell him the uncomfortable truth about his physical decline. He was a king trapped in a kingdom of yes-men, completely cut off from the ordinary realities of human existence and feedback. He would obsessively buy entire fleets of luxury Cadillacs and give them away to total strangers or low-level employees on a whim, seeking a momentary rush of validation from their gratitude. He would order his private jet, the Lisa Marie, to fly his inner circle across the country in the middle of the night just to purchase a specific type of peanut butter and banana sandwich from a restaurant in Denver, Colorado. This was the tragic paradox of Elvis Presley. He was a man who could command the absolute attention and love of the entire planet, yet he could not find a single moment of peace or genuine security within his own mind. The vast, yawning gulf between Elvis the legend and Elvis the man had become an unbridgeable chasm that was slowly swallowing him alive. Nowhere was this internal complexity and deep-seated psychological need for validation more vividly illustrated than in his bizarre, lifelong interest in law enforcement, weaponry, and official authority. Despite his early public image as a dangerous counterculture rebel who had disrupted American societal norms and corrupted the youth, Elvis possessed a deep conservative reverence for traditional authority, patriotism, and the police force. He obsessively collected authentic police badges from various cities he visited on tour, often using his immense fame to gain midnight access to local law enforcement departments, where he would trade autographed photos for official police equipment, sirens, and uniform pieces. This obsession culminated in one of the strangest, most surreal, and highly secretive moments in American political history. In December 1970, feeling intensely lonely, restless, and increasingly concerned about what he perceived as the moral decline of American youth through the rise of the hippie movement, anti-war protests, and the drug culture, Elvis decided on a sudden whim to travel to Washington, D.C. He wrote a passionate, 6-page handwritten letter to President Richard Nixon on an American Airlines airplane notepad, expressing his deep desire to help the administration combat the growing drug epidemic and leftist radicalism that he believed was destroying the country from within. He requested a personal meeting with the president and explicitly asked to be appointed as a federal agent at large in the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, believing that his unique position as a celebrity would allow him to reach young people in a way the government never could. On December 21, the meeting actually took place in the absolute secrecy of the Oval Office. The images of that encounter, the king of rock and roll dressed in a purple velvet tunic, a high-collared shirt, and a massive gold belt buckle, shaking hands with a stiff, conservative Richard Nixon, remain among the most requested photographs in the history of the US. National Archives. Elvis proudly showed the president his collection of police badges, criticized the Beatles for what he saw as their anti-American sentiments, and reiterated his desperate desire for an official federal narcotics badge. Nixon, recognizing the immense public relations value of aligning himself with the country's biggest star, ordered that the official badge be brought to the room and presented to him. For Elvis, that piece of metal was not just a novelty or a collector's item. It represented a strange psychological validation. He genuinely believed it granted him a form of official, sovereign power and authority that transcended his status as an entertainer, famously believing he could legally carry weapons and drugs across international borders without consequence. Tragically, it also revealed a profound, tragic delusion. A man who was deeply trapped in his own severe, escalating prescription drug addiction was seeking official government authority to fight a war on drugs. It was a fascinating, baffling moment that showed just how detached from reality Elvis had become, and how his fame allowed him to bypass the rules that governed ordinary men. Throughout all of these personal, physical, and psychological struggles, the dominant, highly controversial figure pulling the strings of his career and manipulating his decisions remained Colonel Tom Parker. The relationship between the artist and the manager was one of the most complicated, codependent, and heavily scrutinized partnerships in the history of the modern music industry. There is no denying that Parker's ruthless marketing genius, singular focus, and unyielding negotiation tactics had helped create the global phenomenon of Elvis Presley. He understood the power of brand merchandising, television exposure, and mass appeal long before they became standard industry practice, ensuring that Elvis's name and likeness were plastered on everything from lipsticks to record players, generating millions of dollars in passive revenue. However, as the years progressed and Elvis's health began to deteriorate, allegations of extreme financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and total control began to heavily cloud the Colonel's legacy. Parker, who was actually a Dutch illegal immigrant named Andreas Cornelis van Kooijek, a secret he guarded fiercely throughout his life to avoid deportation, charged an unprecedented 50% commission on Elvis's total earnings, a predatory rate that was far higher than the standard 10 to 20% manager's fee in the entertainment business. Furthermore, many music historians and close friends argue that Parker's decisions consistently stifled Elvis's artistic growth and emotional well-being. He turned down prestigious, artistically fulfilling film roles that could have established Elvis as a serious, Oscar-caliber dramatic actor, such as starring alongside Barbra Streisand in the 1976 remake of A Star is Born, simply because the financial terms, billing rights, or studio control did not suit his rigid, greedy demands. He confined Elvis to a relentless loop of low-quality, cheap Hollywood musical comedies in the 1960s because they guaranteed quick, easy profits and high soundtrack sales with minimal artistic effort. Most tragically of all, Colonel Parker consistently and aggressively refused to allow Elvis to tour internationally, despite overwhelming, unprecedented global demand and Elvis's own desperate vocal desire to perform for his millions of fans overseas in Europe, Asia, and South America. For years, Elvis dreamed of performing on the global stage, but Parker always found an excuse, claiming that security was inadequate, that foreign venues could not afford his fee, or that the travel logistics were too complex. It is now widely known and accepted that Parker blocked these international tours because he lacked a valid United States passport and could not obtain one due to his illegal alien status. He feared that if he left American soil with Elvis, his true identity would be discovered at the border and he would be permanently barred from returning to his financial empire. To keep his golden goose close and under his absolute control, he kept Elvis confined to America, trapping him in the grueling, repetitive cycle of Las Vegas residencies and exhausting domestic tours that drained his energy and directly contributed to his physical and mental decline. The man who had helped build the King of Rock and Roll had also built the very prison that was destroying him piece by piece, treating a human being as nothing more than a financial commodity to be milked until there was nothing left. As the mid-1970s arrived, the physical and emotional decline of Elvis Presley became undeniable to anyone who saw him, causing deep alarm among his fans and close friends. The youthful, vibrant, and incredibly fit icon of the 1950s and 1960s was gone, replaced by a man who was visibly overweight, chronically ill, and emotionally exhausted by the weight of his own existence. He suffered from an array of severe, painful health problems, including an enlarged colon, high blood pressure, severe glaucoma, chronic insomnia, and significant liver damage, all exacerbated or directly caused by his massive daily consumption of prescription narcotics and a terrible diet of heavy fried comfort foods. He became increasingly isolated inside Graceland, refusing to leave his room for days at a time, eating dinner in bed and communicating with his staff through intercoms. Yet, despite his obvious suffering, the financial machinery demanded that the show go on without interruption. The massive financial demands of his lifestyle, his expensive gifts, the maintenance of his estate, and the constant pressure from Colonel Parker and his inner circle meant that he rarely took time to rest, heal, or enter a proper rehabilitation facility. He was trapped on a treadmill of performances that he could not step off of. When he took the stage in his final years, the contrast between the powerful performer of the past and the struggling man of the present was heartbreaking for audiences to behold. There were nights when he slurred his words so heavily they were unintelligible, forgot the lyrics to his most famous songs, and appeared barely able to stand without leaning heavily against the microphone stand for support. His eyes were often glassy, his movements lethargic, and his once sharp mind clouded by the fog of heavy sedation. Yet, such was his innate extraordinary talent and the sheer power of his voice that there were still moments of pure, transcendent vocal brilliance that would leave audiences in tears, reminding everyone of the genius trapped inside that failing body. He was giving everything he had left to his fans, using his music to mask a deep systemic agony that was tearing him apart from the inside out. By 1977, the end was approaching with terrifying visible speed, and those closest to him knew that a catastrophe was imminent if something did not change. His final concert took place on June 26, 1977, at Market Square Arena in Indianapolis, Indiana. Those who witnessed that final performance saw a man who seemed to intuitively know his time on earth was short. He delivered a performance infused with a raw, desperate emotion, singing his heart out one last time before the curtain fell forever. A few weeks later, on August 16, 1977, the world stopped spinning for millions of people. Elvis Presley was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of his beloved Graceland estate by his fiancée, Ginger Alden. Attempts by his road managers and medical staff to revive him failed, and at 3:30 p.m. at Baptist Memorial Hospital, the 42-year-old superstar was officially pronounced dead, sending a shockwave around the globe. The initial public announcement from the medical examiner attributed his sudden death to a cardiac arrhythmia, a diplomatic, protective phrasing designed to shield his legendary image and his family from the immediate stigma of drug addiction. But subsequent independent investigations, court cases, and comprehensive toxicology reports revealed the grim, unvarnished reality of his passing. His heart had simply given out under the immense, unsustainable pressure of years of severe, chronic polypharmacy. High, lethal concentrations of numerous prescription drugs, including codeine, morphine, Valium, Placidil, and various other heavy sedatives and painkillers, were found circulating in his blood system at the time of his death. The news of his passing unleashed a wave of global grief that had never been seen before in modern celebrity culture. Tens of thousands of devastated, weeping fans descended upon Memphis within hours, lining the hot summer streets outside the gates of Graceland to catch a final glimpse of the Black Hearse, while record stores around the world were completely emptied of his albums within days. The nation, and indeed the entire civilized world, mourned not just the loss of a popular singer, but the tragic end of a cultural era that he had single-handedly defined. The tragedy of Elvis Presley is not just that he died young, but that he died so deeply alone, isolated within a crowd, surrounded by a world of artificial glamour, greed, and sycophancy that actively prevented him from getting the human help and medical intervention he so desperately required to survive. He was a cultural revolutionary who changed the face of music, fashion, and social integration, yet he could not save himself from the destructive, toxic forces of his own historic fame. Decades after his passing, his massive impact on popular culture remains immeasurable, his influence seen in every solo artist who has ever taken the stage after him. He defined the ultimate trajectory of the American dream, achieving heights of success, wealth, and worship that no human being before him had ever imagined possible. But his life also serves as a permanent, haunting, and deeply cautionary tale about the human cost of becoming a living icon. Behind the myth, behind the screaming crowds, behind the gold records, and behind the eternal title of the King of Rock and Roll was a vulnerable, lonely boy from Mississippi who just wanted to be loved for who he truly was. And in the end, that simple, unfulfilled human desire may be the most shocking secret of all.